Remark about Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Patanjali was a pioneer in the art of rationally handling the mystical path, aiming at individualizing a universal physiological direction of inner events that explained why a certain phenomenon inherent to the spiritual path should be preceded and necessarily followed by other ones. His extreme synthesis may be criticized or, because of its temporal distance, may be hard to understand. However, his work is of extraordinary importance. There are different ways of translating the Sanskrit terms summarizing Patanjali's 8 steps of yoga: yam, niyama, asana, pranayam, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi. Boring and useless from the practical point of view is the definition of yam and niyama. Yam, self-control, non-violence, avoid lies, avoid stealing, avoid being lustful and seek non-attachment. Niyama, religious observances, cleanliness, contentment, discipline, study of the self and surrender to the Supreme God. Why useless? A beginner cannot understand what study of the self means. In my opinion, the moral rules are not to be put as premises to be respected in order to start the path of yoga, but are the consequences of a serious spiritual effort brought ahead for years, nay, for tens of years. As for asana, position of the body, Patanjali explains it must be stable and comfortable. There is no hint of particular exercises of concentration and meditation after asana and before pranayam. The two interesting and enlightening concepts for those who practice Kriya are pranayam and pratyahara. They refer respectively to the regulation of the prana by repetition of particular breathing patterns and to the internalization process of the awareness which becomes disconnected from the external reality. The 3 further phases, dharana, dhyana, samadhi, respectively mean concentration upon a physical or abstract object, contemplation of the essential nature of such object, lengthening of such contemplation in a constant flow of awareness up the point of being lost in it. A Kriyaban understands concentration upon an object as the concentration on the breath, the spine, the chakras. The contemplation of the essential nature of such object means to become absorbed in the sweetness originating from this basic concentration. Being lost in it means the unending happiness while achieving the final ecstatic state. This is, in my opinion, the essence of Patanjali's thought. Fixed in this conviction, I decided that in my routine the 2 techniques Hong So and Om had to be practiced after Kriya Pranayam. I am unable to express the emotion and feeling of sacredness which characterized henceforth my practice of Kriya. At the end of my practice, I often repeated to myself the sentence, quoted in Yogi by Lalla Yogiswari. What acid of sorrow have I not drunk? Countless my rounds of birth and death. Lo! Not but nectar in my cup quaffed by the art of breath. This beautiful sentence intensified my enthusiasm, strengthening my determination to unceasingly perfect my Kriya path. 3. A couple of years passed by. I was preparing myself towards receiving the higher Kriyas through the correspondence course. At the end, finally they entered my life. As the reader can guess, the process of learning them brought some trouble in my life. Among the Kriyabans in the meditation group, I didn't saw a great interest in the higher Kriyas. A woman who was my friend had received Kriya initiation many years before. She had once lived near our school's general offices. I asked if she had received the second Kriya. She didn't seem to understand the question. So I reminded her that Lahiri Mahasaya's disciple, Swami Pranabananda, had accompanied the moment of his death with the practice of the second Kriya. She became visibly nervous, saying that the quotation clearly referred to the technique of Kriya Pranayam, 1 breath, then a second one. This had to be, in her opinion, the second Kriya. I looked at her with a meek but piercing look. I felt my legs give way. I had the impression that the idea of a further technique to be added to the too many already received and practiced daily upset her. It was as if she felt she had made so great an effort to form the habit of daily practice of the first Kriya that she could not muster up even more dedication. I believe that, up to this day, she has remained fixed in her conviction. The lessons with the higher Kriyas were given after completing the basic correspondence course. Unfortunately, those lessons contained some ambiguous parts. Just to give an example, PY wrote that in order to awaken Kundalini it was important to regularly practice Kechari Mudra, but the instruction on how to perform it were nowhere to be found. I contacted the elderly lady who was officially invested as a meditation counselor, the same sweet lady who taught me the Om meditation technique. She could not help me to clarify my doubts. Just like everyone else, she had learned them only in written form because, unfortunately, after PY's Mahasamadhi no direct initiations were ever given. Acknowledging her uncertainties about their correct execution, she admitted that she regretted not having had her higher Kriyas checked by ministers who were direct disciples of PY, despite having had plenty of opportunities to do so. After some time, I had still not recovered from this shock when an aristocratic-looking lady disclosed to me she had received initiation in the so-called higher Kriyas years before. Full of enthusiasm, my eyes opened wide. She said she had felt so unworthy that she had put them aside and, after some time, she had forgotten them entirely. Forgotten? I couldn't believe my ears. This last abomination was inconceivable to me. Her self-satisfied ignorance, passed off as humility and who knows what kind of overabundant devotion, crossed the bounds of decency. When I expressed my objection that her behavior seemed an exhibition of indifference toward the higher teachings taught by her guru, she looked at me in bewilderment as if my impertinence had violated an implicit law: do not impudently enter the intimate arena of her sadhana. She replied that what she had was enough, and then briskly cut off any further discussion. I wrote to the management of my Kriya school in order to schedule an appointment with one of its representative ministers who would soon come to our country to impart initiation to Kriya Yoga. I asked for this interview because I really needed it. It is not in my temperament to disturb anyone on trivialities. I am sure that, in order to answer my questions, it would have taken the minister just a couple of minutes. I looked forward to that date with great anticipation. A sad episode. When the minister arrived, my meditation counselor introduced me to him. He said he would clarify my doubts as soon as possible. In the following days I became dismayed when I realized that the minister kept postponing our meeting without valid reasons. Since I had decided not to give up, at last we met. Unfortunately, I found this meeting to be truly disturbing. I was convinced that hypocrisy, bureaucracy, formality, and deception were totally alien to one who devoted his life to practicing and teaching Kriya. Yet the sensation I had meeting him was akin to meeting a businessman who had more important affairs in mind and who was very irritable. He was emphatic that we not talk about Kechari Mudra, and with regard to the third and fourth Kriya techniques. He advised me brusquely to restrict my practice to the first Kriya. He declared I was overexcited and that this was not a good sign for a Kriyaban. I replied I would surely take his advice into consideration. Nevertheless, I wanted to see how to move my head correctly in order to practice those techniques in the future. Annoyed, taking my remark as insolence, he recommended that I send my questions to the school's head and stood up to leave as he said this. In vain I replied that the movements of the head, required for third and fourth Kriya techniques, could not be shown in a letter. I was speaking to a wall, and the refusal was absolute. I had always trusted and respected PY's organization and had studied the reference literature as if preparing for a university exam. I have asked to this organization only one thing, that this so much craved jewel of Kriya was taught in its completeness. Why this reaction from the minister? After some time, The feeling of having witnessed the senseless whims of a man in power yielded to a different consideration. Very probably that minister had given me the same discipline he received during his postulant years. A lady who had known him at that time depicted him as a very curious Kriyaban who usually put many technical questions to elder ministers. Knowing the rules of monastic discipline, I was sure that his queries weren't always answered promptly. After my interview with that ill-disposed figure, I was in an atrocious mental and emotional state. I wondered what role a school played that was not doing its very best to clarify each given teaching. For what purpose were our ministers traveling around the world, if not to directly show students how to practice what they have learned through the correspondence course? Why should I feel guilty and unsuitable for the Kriya path, only because I had dared to ask, firmly but politely, for a practical demonstration? I was not able to drop the whole matter and was quite agitated. Those who saw me immediately after the meeting said I was unrecognizable. Among them, a lady with a honeyed voice suggested that I had gotten an important lesson from our Guru, in her opinion. I had a too self-assured attitude and should learn to accept unquestioningly the word of a minister. Strange as it might seem, a part of me was relishing the whole situation. I knew for certain that this destructive experience would somehow be turned into something positive, crucial for my path. I was too much in love with the Kriya path to be daunted by any difficulty.